What's going on? This is Ryan with Automatic Comics, and up next we are going to talk about how that new Spider-Man trailer is impacting the prices of Amazing Spider-Man Silver Age villains. Stay tuned. Alright, so before we get started, please remember to hit that like button and hit the subscribe button if you'd like to see more content like this. So ever since that trailer came out earlier this week, I had been getting some questions from people about how this is going to impact the prices of books, of big Amazing Spider-Man Silver Age villains, and the villains that would show up in the Sinister Six, because it really seems like we are going to get some version of the Sinister Six. We're seeing a lot of villains start to appear in this movie, and so that's definitely causing some speculation. And since I watched that weekly Heritage comic auction, what I did is, as I was pricing books for the auction, I noticed there were a lot of Spider-Man villain books coming up in this auction. Now, that was probably people that saw that trailer and were like, this is the time to sell these books, so they put them in there. So I thought this was a good opportunity to look at how that trailer was actually impacting these prices compared to prior highs, prior sales that we'd seen with those books. So the way I'm going to go through these, I'm just going to start with the earliest one that was in this auction, and I'll move from there. So in this case, it happens to be Amazing Spider-Man number 2, so I'll talk about that one first, and I will go through it. I have 10 different books, 10 different villain books that I'm going to talk about in this video. The last one I'll talk about is Amazing Spider-Man Annual number 1, which is actually the first appearance of the Sinister Six. Now, we really only know about 3 characters for sure that we're getting. We know we're getting Doc Ock because we saw him in the trailer. We're almost certain we're getting Green Goblin because we saw the pumpkin bomb and we heard the laugh. And then we know we're getting Electro just because of leaks and kind of some news that came out with Jamie Foxx coming back for this movie that came out last year. So we're pretty sure about at least those 3 characters, but everything else is really just speculation at this point. There's little things that were in the trailer that make people think there are certain characters that are coming. We really don't know for sure about the rest of them. So the first book I'm going to start with is Amazing Spider-Man number 2. It's a book from 1963. And the copy that sold in the auction this week was a CGC 4.5 that sold for $3,360. And now, this is the first appearance of the Vulture, so he's a major Spider-Man villain. He is part of that original Sinister Six. And he was also the main villain in the first new Spider-Man movie, Homecoming. And so I think there's a good chance we could see this character again. Even though we didn't see him in the trailer, I think there's a good chance we could potentially see this character show up again in this movie. And so I think this is a decent one to, spec on. Even though it's Amazing Spider-Man 2, it is not an easy book to spec on. It is going to be very expensive regardless, but it is a great key to buy with the potential that it could go up even more if that character shows up. Now, I wanted to give a few details about these books. So a CGC 4.5, there are 165 Blue Label Universal copies on the CGC census. Total number of copies for this book are 2,348, with 1,867 of those being Universal copies, so unaltered copies. Now, the price a year ago for this 4.5 was $1,800. The record was from March 4th, and that was $3,152. So yes, this was a record. This $3,360 sale was a record for this book. However, it did fall short of my estimate. I was thinking it was going to hit $3,600, so it fell short by a few percent, but it was a record by about $200, about 5%, but really not that much movement in this book. But given that we've seen some kind of weakness in the comic prices recently, that is definitely something that shows some strength returning to that book, especially since I think there is a chance that we could see this character in this movie and, maybe a potential future trailer. So I think this is a good book to own regardless, but definitely a character that we should keep an eye out on because there is a chance we could see them. Okay, now number 2, the second book that came up in this auction was Amazing Spider-Man number 3, also from 1963. There were actually 2 copies of this. And so this is the first appearance of Doc Ock, and he's just one of the most popular Spider-Man villains, especially from the Silver Age. And we saw him appear in the trailer. He was probably one of the coolest things to see in the trailer. He looked incredible. The CG looked incredible with him. However, we did know this character was coming. He had leaked that he was in this movie, so we knew this character was coming. So that that spoiled a little bit of the surprise with this. Now, the 2 copies that sold were a CGC 5.0 that sold for $4,680 and a CGC 4.0 that sold for $3,600. Now, for the 5.0, there are 156 blue labels out there in the CGC census. The 4.0, there are 185. Total census count is 2,541 copies of this book, with 1,925 being universal copies. Now, a year ago, for the 5.0, it's $2,500. For the 4.0, $1,900. Now, the records for these books were actually quite a bit higher than the sales that we saw today. So the record for the 5.0 was $5,500 from May 12th. The record for the 4.0 was $4,560 from June 21st. So at this auction, we saw both of these books sell for about $900 less than their records, around 20% less than their records. So that's a pretty significant drop-off from those records, which honestly, I think that's pretty surprising, because everything I was hearing from people after they watched that trailer is they loved seeing Doc Ock appear in that trailer, and so I thought that was going to lead to some big sales with this book. So honestly, I am surprised that it's down, but we'll see. I mean, it's still, no matter what, it is a solid book to own. Amazing Spider-Man #3, one of the most popular villains of all time for Spider-Man. So never a bad book to own, but did not meet what I was expecting for sales with this book this week. All right, number 3 that we're going to talk about here is Amazing Spider-Man #4, also from 1963, where a CGC 3.5 sold for $1,560. And this is the first appearance of the Sandman, right on the cover. And I mean, unfortunately, he's from one of the worst Spider-Man movies in recent modern times. It was the one with Venom as well, and it was just, I don't know, I didn't like it. I thought it was terrible. But there was a scene in the trailer where there was some lightning hitting kind of like a dust or sand cloud, and the speculation is that the lightning was Electro and the sand is Sandman, and that we're going to see both of those characters. But we have no idea really. I mean, that's definitely speculation, especially on the side of Sandman. Now, for a 3.5, there are 191 blue labels on the census. Total census count for this book is 2,516, with 2,152 of those being universal copies. Now, the price a year ago for a 3.5 was $800. The record from August 16th, just a couple weeks ago, was 1,920. So this sale of 1,560, well below that record. Now, there had been a $1,560 sale a week ago, but still, you would have thought, with speculation on this, people thinking this character's coming, that it would have at least jumped back up to that high, but it didn't. It stayed right at that last sale. It definitely failed to meet expectations. It sold for about $360, or 15% below that prior record. Now, I think it's definitely a stretch that that cloud is Sandman, but I think it's almost even confirmed that we're getting Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire in this movie. I don't know if it's official or anything yet, but I think pretty much everybody is sure we're getting those characters in this movie. So bringing back the villains that they fought in their prior movies seems very likely. So I think it's definitely a possibility that they'll bring this character back, especially maybe as kind of a way to redo the characters from that movie, since that Spider-Man 3 was just really not that great of a movie. So I think it's a decent spec, and again, I was surprised to see the price of this book go below the prior record. All right, now number 4, this is Amazing Spider-Man #6 with a CGC 4.5 that sold for $1,320. Now, this is the first appearance of the Lizard. This was always one of my favorite books when I was a kid, because I had an issue of 44, which is his second appearance, but I could never afford a copy of issue 6, his first appearance. But there was a scene in the trailer where there was a really kind of like a dark fighting scene where it seemed like Spider-Man was fighting some muscled beings, muscled character, and the speculation is that that is the Lizard. I honestly think it kind of looked like Venom, but I think it's very unlikely that we're going to get Venom in this movie. But so the speculation is that this is the Lizard, and for this 4.5, there are 187 blue labels on the census. Total census count for this book is 2,632, with 2,261 copies that are universal copies. Now, price a year ago for this book was $800. The record from July 26th was $1,260. So the sale at this auction of $1,320 was a new record by just $60. but it was well below what I was expecting this book to sell for. I was thinking this book was going to sell for $1,800, since a 4.0 had sold for $1,650 on May 7th, and a 5.5 had sold for $3,120 on July 5th. So yes, this was a record for this book, but I thought it was a pretty weak sale regardless. I thought it was going to go much higher. And while, again, it may be a bit of a stretch that we're guessing that this is going to be the Lizard based on that little clip in the trailer, it does again seem very likely that villains from these other universes where these characters, in this case Andrew Garfield, this was the villain that he fought in his first Spider-Man movie, villains that we have from those other universes will potentially show up in this movie. I think that's very possible. I think it's very reasonable to think that we will get the Lizard in this movie. He isn't one of the original members of the Sinister Six, even though he is a very early Spider-Man villain, but I think it's possible we could get him as one of these new members of this team in this movie. All right, so number 5, this is Amazing Spider-Man number 13, and we've moved up to 1964 for this book. This actually wasn't a graded copy. This was a raw copy, a 2.0 raw that sold for $720. And the reason that this book is here is this first appearance of Mysterio, and he is actually one of the original members of the Sinister Six. And we don't necessarily have any reason to think that Mysterio is going to be one of the characters that shows up in this movie. However, he is the reason that Spider-Man is in all the trouble that he's in No Way Home, in this next movie. So it's possible that either Mysterio faked his death or that we get another version of him from another universe. And a lot of people think Doctor Strange was acting really weird in this movie, not like himself, and so it's possible that that's something where it's Mysterio doing this. And I know some people think it's Mephisto, but I mean, I'm tired of the Mephisto stuff. Like, I don't know if we're ever getting that character. But so there is some speculation that Mysterio could be a character we see, and I think that's not unreasonable with him being on that original team. Now, I'll give some info about a graded 2.0 since there isn't really any information on raw books. So for a graded 2.0, there are only 64 blue labels on the census. Total census for this book is 2,796 copies with 2,312 universal copies. Now, this one actually I thought looked nicer than a 2.0. I think this one is at least a 2.5, so that's possible why people maybe paid a little bit more for this book, since a year ago, price for a 2.0 graded was $450, and the record was $602 from February of this year. So in this auction, this was $720 for a raw copy, so more than the record for the estimated grade. And so that's one of these things I talked about where I've been seeing prices, especially Silver and Bronze Age books, of raw copies selling for as much or more than graded copies in a lot of cases. And this is one of those cases. Now again, it could be because this one did look nicer than a 2.0 and maybe other people that were watching this auction felt the same way as me. And so that's why they paid up a little bit. But still, very strong sale for this book. So it could be that people are thinking either that Mysterio has a chance of showing up in the next Spider-Man movie, or it's just possible that they think this was maybe a 2.5 or a 3.0. I don't see a 3.0 with it, but a 2.5 maybe. And then they were buying it based on that grading estimate and thinking they could get maybe like a grade bump off of what the estimated grade was. All right, so number 6. This is Amazing Spider-Man number 14, 1964. This is a CGC 5.0 that sold for $4,200. Now, this is the first appearance of Green Goblin. I think this is the book everybody wanted to see a sale for. Everybody wants to know how this trailer was going to impact that book, because nobody that I knew of was expecting Green Goblin to show up in this movie. There hadn't been any leaks about that, and when we heard that laugh and we saw that pumpkin bomb, that was the most exciting part of that trailer for me. I was just like, oh my gosh. I was like, that is awesome. We are getting the Green Goblin. I immediately thought that. I didn't have any thought that it was the Hobgoblin. And I mean, I'm excited to see that character get brought back again. Now, the grade, like I said, was a 5.0. There are 300 blue labels of that book in a 5.0 out there. Total census, 4,315. There are a lot of copies of that book graded, with 3,532 universal copies. Now, price a year ago was $1,650, and the record from just July 17th, about a month ago, was $2,800. This sale at $4,200 was a huge record. I mean, $1,400 more, 50% higher than its prior record. Just a massive sale. And so there's no question. The reason for that is that people were not expecting this character to show up in this movie, and the instant they saw him, it's a rush to buy those books. So, I have my copy up there. Mine is just a 1.0. I used to have a couple 6.5s, but I sold them a while ago. They're obviously worth a lot more now than they were, but it is what it is. That went into buying other books that I have, but still, awesome book, and you can definitely tell that trailer drove the price increase for this book. All right, number 7. Next book I'm going to talk about is Amazing Spider-Man number 15. Also from 1964, a CGC 5.0, sold for $2,160. Now, this is the first appearance of Kraven, and the reason I wanted to talk about this one is that he is one of the original members of the Sinister Six. Now, he is not thought to be in this movie, but Kraven has been cast for his own standalone movies. So it's not out of the realm of possibility that we could see this character show up in this movie, or maybe some end credit scene, something like that. So details about this book. In a 5.0, there are 194 blue labels on the census. Total census count is 2,718 copies with 2,383 blue labels. Now, the price a year ago, just $850 for this grade. The record was $2,196 back on May 27th. So this sale of $2,160 just missed that record by $36, really close. But there had been some recent weakness in this book. It has had a sale of $1,620 on July 26th. So this is about $500 above that, about almost 30% above that sale. So it's possible the trailer kind of reminded people that Kraven's coming, or there is just potentially some speculation that one of those slots that they're going to try to fill for those 6 members of that team goes to Kraven because he's already been cast. But honestly, I have no idea. I don't think it's likely we're going to see him in this movie, but there is a possibility, and we know he is coming eventually, so never a bad book to pick up. All right, now number 8, and this is Amazing Spider-Man number 41. This is from 1966, getting a little later in the Silver Age. This was a CGC 7.5 that sold for $1,320. This is the first appearance of the Rhino, and there's definitely been speculation that he's one of the characters that we're going to see in this movie. And honestly, I hope it is not the one from the second Andrew Garfield movie where it was that armored suit. I did not like that version of the Rhino. I thought it was terrible. Now, I fully understand making it into a suit, having that be something that's used for that character, but I didn't like that iteration of the Rhino. I thought it was just not great. But again, this goes with the fact that I think we're going to end up seeing villains that were fought previously in the other Spider-Man movies. So it is very reasonable to think that one of those members that's going to come into this team is the Rhino. He was definitely not on the original Sinister Six. That first appearance was about 3 years after Amazing Spider-Man Annual number 1, which is the first appearance of the Sinister Six, and so we know he's at least not on that original team. Now, for this book in a 7.5, there are 178 blue labels. Total census is 2,964 copies with 2,458 blue label or universal copies. Price a year ago for this book was $600, and the record was $1,441 on June 24th. So this sale of $1,320 again falls short of that record. Now, similar to Amazing Spider-Man 15, it was still a pretty strong sale compared to recent sales. There had been an $890 sale on June 1st, and so that record that from June 24th, it was a huge jump for that book. So it's possible that just overshot a little bit, and so this is just a decent, strong sale, moving up in prices for this book. So I think this was still a strong sale. There's still a possibility we're going to see this character in this movie, that we'll see this character again in future Spider-Man movies. But I think it's a little less likely we'll see this character in this movie, but still, one of Spider-Man's big villains from the Silver Age, definitely a possibility. All right, now number 9, and this is the only book that isn't from the Silver Age that I'm going to talk about. This is Amazing Spider-Man number 238. This was a CGC 9.4 that sold for $660. Now, the reason I wanted to talk about this book is that this is the first appearance of the Hobgoblin, and this is a character that people had been speculating on. I think that he was going to show up in this movie. I mean, the prices of this book over the last 6 months just went crazy. I mean, just went through the roof. And when people saw that pumpkin bomb, I think a lot of people thought it's a possibility that it is the Hobgoblin. And that's still there. That possibility is still there. But personally, again, I think it's unlikely. I really think we're getting the Green Goblin with this movie. Now, for a 9.4, this is a later book. This book is from 1983, so there's a lot more copies on the census. There are 1,222 copies in a 9.4. Total census is 7,937, with 6,241 being blue labels. Now, price a year ago was $350, but the record was $999 from May 27th. So this book had been quite a bit higher. It's actually dropped recently. I had estimated the price of this book at $625 based on a couple recent sales. But so this sale for $660, I mean, it beat what I was expecting, but it's still quite a bit down from where it was at that high. Now, it is definitely a book that I would watch. It's definitely a good Spider-Man book to have in your collection. There's nothing bad about this book. It's a great Spider-Man villain, but I don't think we're going to get him in this movie. I think it's possible we could get him later in the future, since one of the iterations of Hobgoblin is played by Ned Leeds, who is Spider-Man's best friend in this version of the movies. And so I think it's definitely a possibility out there, especially since in one of the later versions of the Sinister Six, from Amazing Spider-Man 337 in 1990, the Hobgoblin is a member of that team. And that's actually something that was from Swagglehouse Comics. I was watching one of his videos recently, and he was talking about that. And so that's why that was recently in my memory, that was one of the versions of the Sinister Six, and that Hobgoblin had actually been on that team. All right, so now to number 10. This is the last one on the list. Like I said at the beginning, this is Amazing Spider-Man Annual number 1, and this is the first appearance of the Sinister Six. They are all on the cover. It is an awesome cover. I actually have a 4.0 back here, so that's my current keeper copy of that book, and I have a raw copy. This is my childhood copy. That's probably like a 1.8 or something. It's in, the spine is pretty beat up and everything with this book, but still, front cover looks real nice. So this is a copy that I've talked about a few times, where I bought it from my brother for $75 when I was a little kid, and I've always felt like back then definitely got ripped off. With the condition, it was not worth $75 back when I was really young, but it's worth more than $75 now. So yeah, so cool book to have. But like I said, this is the first appearance of the Sinister Six, and so you've got that original team of the Vulture, Electro, Sandman, Doc Ock, Kraven, and Mysterio. So that is the original team that he was fighting against. We already know that they aren't going with that original team because we've got the Green Goblin, or possibly the Hobgoblin, but I'll say the Green Goblin, since he wasn't part of that original Sinister Six team. And so they're definitely veering away from that original team a little bit. We don't know exactly how much or which exact characters are going to make up that team. Now, the Heritage Auction this week had a 4.0 that sold for $2,880. In a 4.0, there are 133 universal copies. Total census for this book is 1,957, with 1,673 universal copies. Now, the price a year ago was $900. I got mine about a year ago, my 4.0, for about $700. I had packaged it with an ASM number 9 that I no longer own. Kind of, one of those things again. Wish I still had it, but I sold it and it's bought other things, that kind of thing now. The record for this book was $3,000 from May 22nd. I think that's kind of a theme, if you've noticed from tonight, that most of these records came from around May, late May, early June, and that's when I've talked about in my market videos, that's really when prices had peaked. So if we're even getting close to those peak prices, I'd say it's a pretty strong sale. So this recent sale of $2,880 got really close to that $3,000 record, only $120 off, just a few percent. So not a new high, but definitely a new recent high, because there had been much lower sales at $2,300 and $2,225 in June. So this is a big jump, about 20% since those recent sales. So if you want to speculate on the Sinister Six on the team, this is the book to buy. It's similar to Avengers number 1, where it's the first appearance of a team, not a character, or Brave and the Bold 28, first appearance of the Justice League, not a individual character. So those team first appearances definitely are still carry a lot of value, are very popular, especially with books like this, where, like I said, it is an awesome cover. You've got all the characters on the front with Spider-Man, and so just a great first appearance book, and definitely one that if we think that we're getting this iteration of the Sinister Six, that is a book to pick up. Now, it's also one of those things where I'm guessing prices will likely continue to increase as we get into that movie, maybe as we get another trailer, and if it clears up a little more what these characters are going to be. So it might be one of those things where you wait until after the movie if we think this is the only time we're going to see them. The only issue would be if they do form and you end up having something where we think we'll get them more in the future. That's where you could continue to see prices increase. Otherwise, I think it'll probably still fall into that villain camp where after they're used in a movie, if this is the only time we're getting them, you could definitely see prices of this book go down after that movie comes out. All right, so those are the 10 books that I'm talking about. Really, I was pretty surprised. We did not have a bunch of records for these books. We had a couple records here and there. The only really big one was Amazing Spider-Man number 14, where it set the record by 50% and beat my expectations with that book. Everything else was either kind of around or just a little below those record prices, or even in a couple cases quite a bit below those record prices. So a little bit of a surprise for me. I thought we were going to see a little more interest and spike in these books with this auction based on that trailer, but it is what it is. Whatever happens in the auction, it's whoever's there bidding, and these are the prices that came out of that. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please hit that like button, hit the subscribe button if you'd like to see more content like this. I've got more videos over here if you'd like to watch some of those, and the subscription button right here if you'd like to subscribe to the channel. I would really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next video.